Welcome to the deep dive. We're really thrilled you're here with us today because we're looking at something that affects literally every second of your modern life.
Yeah.
Even though you can't see it or, touch it or hold it in your hands.
Right, it's completely invisible.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. You walk into a hospital, you hand over your ID, you pay your taxes online, you turn on the tap and expect clean water to flow. Every single one of those actions feels like a physical, tangible interaction with the world.
Yeah.
But underlying all of it is this invisible, incredibly fragile digital architecture. And our mission today is to unpack the evolving, hypervigilant ecosystem that actually keeps a modern nation running safely.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. And we have an incredible foundation for this exploration today. We're looking at an extensive, deeply technical interview with Javier Candau.
Right, he's the Deputy Director General of Spain's National Cryptologic Center, the CCN.
Yeah, the CCN.
Okay.
And this entire conversation revolves around the 19th ESTIC Days, which is happening in November of 2025.
And for anyone who doesn't track the cybersecurity calendar obsessively, which is most people, let's be honest.
Right, yeah.
The ESTIC Days event, it isn't just some generic tech meetup. It is the premier gathering where the actual architects of a nation's digital defense get together to map out the battlefield.
Yeah.
I mean, you have government officials, military operators, and grassroots hackers all in one massive venue.
It's a wild mix, and we are going to dissect the core strategies they are arguing about in those halls. We're going to decode what a digital shield actually means for a society that is hyper-connected. We're going straight into the explosive impact of artificial intelligence on cyber warfare, exploring how it's basically fundamentally changing the physics of defense.
It changes everything.
It does. And we are going to translate the absolute alphabet soup of new European cyber regulations, things like NIS2, ENS, the CRA.
So many acronyms.
So many. We want to translate what those acronyms actually mean for the devices sitting in your living room right now. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we dive into the specific malware or the regulations, we need to set the stakes.
Right.
Why should a citizen going about their daily life care about the structural philosophy of an institutional cybersecurity conference?
Well, you should care, because cybersecurity has completely shed its old identity.
It is no longer just an isolated IT problem relegated to a windowless basement in a corporate office building.
Right, the old stereotype of the guy in the server room.
Exactly. It has morphed into the fundamental pillar of modern civic trust. Think about the social contract between a citizen and a state. That contract historically used to be based on physical borders, physical police forces, physical paper records locked in a vault somewhere.
Yeah.
Today, that entire relationship is mediated through data. Every time a local town hall processes your property taxes or a regional hospital runs an MRI on your child, they're relying on this invisible digital architecture holding firm.
It's all data.
It's all data. And if that architecture crumbles, or if it's secretly compromised, the trust between you and the institutions that govern your life begins to dissolve. National security is no longer just about guarding physical borders against armies.
Wow, yeah.
It is about guarding the integrity of the data flowing silently between a municipal water treatment plant and a regional health registry.
That structural reality leads us perfectly into the central motto of the 19th ESTIC Days. The banner hanging over the 2025 event reads, "A digital shield for an interconnected Spain."
Yes.
Now, Javier Candau makes a point in the source material to emphasize that this isn't some catchy marketing slogan a PR firm cooked up in an afternoon. It is a highly specific strategic philosophy.
It's been in the works for a while.
Yeah, the National Cryptologic Center has been maturing this concept for 4 to 5 years to address a very fascinating, deeply structural paradox unique to Spain.
A paradox that, honestly, many modern nations are grappling with, but Spain exemplifies it perfectly. It's the tension of being a highly decentralized country from a governance perspective, while simultaneously being digitally hyperconnected from an infrastructure perspective.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that is so problematic. Because Spain is made up of autonomous communities, thousands of local municipalities, and regional governments.
Right.
And in the physical world, they operate with a significant degree of independence. A local mayor makes local decisions. But in the digital realm, they are not isolated islands. They're all plugged into the exact same massive national grid.
And that specific tension between decentralized authority and hyperconnected infrastructure creates a terrifying landscape for a security architect.
Why is that?
because the oldest rule in physical security still applies to digital networks. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. But the consequences scale differently here.
Okay, how so?
Well, in a decentralized physical world, if a tiny local town hall leaves its filing cabinet unlocked overnight, the damage is completely localized. A thief might steal the town's zoning permits. It's a bad day for that specific town, but it does not bring down the national infrastructure. The physical isolation protects the rest of the country.
But the moment you plug that town hall into the internet?
The isolation vanishes completely. In the hyper-connected digital world, that unlocked filing cabinet at the local town hall is actually a server.
Right.
And that server might have an automated connection to a regional tax database, which in turn authenticates against a national health or identity registry. You have public administrations and private companies operating completely independently. They have vastly different security budgets.
Oh, massively different.
Vastly different levels of technical expertise. And historically, they do not share information with each other. For an attacker, this fragmented ecosystem is an absolute playground.
Because they don't have to go through the front door.
Exactly. They don't need to launch a frontal assault on the heavily guarded central bank. They simply run automated scans across the entire perimeter of the country until they find the smallest, most severely underfunded municipality.
Yeah.
They breach that tiny network, establish a foothold, and use the country's own hyperconnectivity as a backdoor highway straight into the national nervous system.
So when Candau talks about building a shield, he's proposing a mandatory integration to stop that exact scenario. He's demanding an exchange of information to ensure that every single node on that grid, from the smallest town hall to the largest federal agency, maintains a guaranteed baseline level of cybersecurity.
Right.
But I have to push back heavily on the metaphor they're using here.
Oh, really? Why?
Well, when I hear the word shield, I immediately picture a medieval wall. A solid, heavy piece of metal that you hold up to block an incoming arrow. A shield is passive, it's rigid. But based on the actual mechanics of what the CCN is trying to build with this constant information exchange, it doesn't sound like a wall at all. It sounds remarkably like a biological immune system.
I think the immune system analogy is far more accurate to the reality of the engineering. Let's trace that out. How do you see this cellular communication working in this scenario?
Well, a physical shield just sits there and takes a hit. It doesn't learn. But an immune system is highly active and distributed. You have all these different cells spread throughout the entire body, which in our digital scenario are the different government agencies, the private telecommunication companies, the local IT teams.
Yeah, the nodes.
Right. And the only way the body survives is if those cells constantly communicate. If a white blood cell detects a novel pathogen in your foot, it doesn't just fight it locally and keep it a secret.
No, it sends out a warning.
Exactly. It immediately sends chemical signals so the rest of the body knows exactly how to recognize and neutralize that specific threat before the pathogen can travel through the bloodstream and reach your heart. That biological threat intelligence network is exactly what Candau is describing, isn't it?
What's fascinating here is that the National Cryptologic Center arrived at that exact biological conclusion. They realized that without unified governance, without establishing that rapid communication network you just described, decentralized networks are practically defenseless against modern coordinated attacks.
Because you're just sitting ducks.
Right. You cannot build a digital wall around the capital city and call the nation secure. The shield, in their strategic context, is not a physical or software barrier at the edge of the country.
Then what is it?
The shield is the act of sharing. It is the structural operational guarantee that when a tiny municipal server gets hit by a brand new strain of malware on a Tuesday morning, the unique digital signature of that malware is instantly extracted and shared with every hospital, every federal agency, and every private energy provider in the country by Tuesday afternoon.
So the hyper-connected nature of the country stops being the primary vulnerability and is actively transformed into the primary defense mechanism.
Yes, the network itself becomes the armor. The sheer volume of interconnected sensors allows the system to recognize a threat faster than any isolated entity ever could.
That's a brilliant way to frame it. But if we accept that this massive active immune system is the goal of the ESTIC days, the immediate follow-up is, what exactly are the pathogens?
What's trying to get in?
Yeah, what is trying to infect the host? And the source material provides a surprisingly granular look at this, particularly when detailing the physical layout of the event venue. They've dedicated a specific space, room 25.
Room 25. The designation alone carries a certain gravity. It sounds like the setting of a geopolitical thriller.
It really does.
Yeah.
The organizers reserve Room 25 strictly for the dissection of advanced cyber threats.
Just threat analysis all day.
Exactly. And the agenda in this room is heavy. They're openly analyzing attacks sponsored by nation-states, explicitly naming origins like Russia, China, and tracking various unknown state actors.
Which is huge.
It is. But the detail that completely stopped me in my tracks is that a major focus of Room 25 is the presentation of declassified past attacks.
Yes. The declassified files.
These are incidents that previously had a national security classification way too high for public discussion, but they have intentionally downgraded the classification so the granular details can be shared with the attendees.
We cannot overstate how massive of a strategic shift it represents in the intelligence community. For decades, the default posture of national intelligence and defense agencies was absolute, impenetrable secrecy.
Deny, deny, deny.
Exactly. If a state agency suffered a breach, the immediate instinct was to lock it down and deny it ever happened. The logic was that admitting a vulnerability projected weakness to adversaries.
The classic strategy of hiding the black eye so the opponent doesn't know they landed a punch.
That's it. But that strategy is actively detrimental in a hyper-connected world. Why is sharing these historical case studies suddenly so vital? Because it is the only way to allow the broader defense community to study the actual mechanical anatomy of a state-sponsored breach.
Yeah.
You can't train an immune system on hypothetical models.
You mean the real virus?
Right. When a government declassifies a sophisticated attack from a state actor like Russia or China, they aren't just issuing a press release saying, "We were hacked." They are taking the hood off the car. They are revealing the attacker's tactics, techniques, and procedures, what the industry calls TTPs.
Let's cram that acronym for a second because it gets thrown around a lot. What does a declassified TTP actually look like to a defender sitting in the audience of Room 25?
Well, it looks like a meticulous forensic blueprint. A TTP briefing shows the community exactly which obscure vulnerability in a firewall was exploited to gain initial access.
Oh.
It details exactly how the attackers manipulated user privileges to move laterally from a low-level workstation to a critical server. It reveals the specific encrypted channels they used to slowly siphon data out of the network without triggering alarms, and the exact scripts they ran to wipe their own footprints before leaving.
That is incredibly detailed.
It has to be. By declassifying this, you transform abstract, paralyzing paranoia into highly actionable engineering data. You give the private sector the exact signatures they need to update their own defenses.
I completely understand the value of that forensic blueprint, but listening to this, I have to ask a genuinely cynical question.
Go for it.
Are the defenders just trapped in a perpetual game of digital whack-a-mole? I mean, if the primary strategy is constantly dissecting past attacks to prepare the network for the next one, aren't we just endlessly reacting to these highly organized international groups?
It can definitely feel that way.
The attackers pop up, exploit a zero-day vulnerability, we suffer the damage, we declassify the TTP, we block it, and then they just pop up somewhere else with a slightly tweaked piece of code. It feels like the defense is always one step behind the physics of the attack.
That is a highly valid critique. And honestly, if we look back at the early 2000s, cybersecurity was almost entirely a reactive game of whack-a-mole. You waited for the antivirus company to find the bad file, and then you blocked it.
Right.
But the sophistication discussed in Room 25 represents the shift from reactive defense to predictive defense. When you aggregate enough declassified TTPs from state actors, you stop looking for specific files and you start recognizing behavioral precursors.
What do you mean by behavioral precursor?
So you don't wait for the mole to pop up. You deploy sensors that detect the ground shifting beneath the soil before the mole even breaches the surface. You look for the subtle, anomalous patterns of network traffic that precede an attack.
Oh, I see. So you're looking for the setup, not just the punch.
Exactly. And Room 25 isn't just focused on geopolitical espionage from large nation-states. The agenda also dives heavily into international ransomware groups. These massive digital cartels that operate like multinational corporations, locking up data for extortion.
Right. They have HR departments and help desks.
They literally do. And they also analyze hacktivist groups, explicitly mentioning collectives like Anonymous and No Name, breaking down their specific ideological tactics. But amidst all these international heavyweights, Candau highlights a threat category that feels significantly more insidious.
Yeah, this part is dark.
He points directly at national cybercriminals, domestic actors stealing data from their own fellow citizens.
The domestic threat alters the emotional landscape of the problem entirely. Let's extrapolate on the real-world impact of that. Because it is one thing to read a headline stating that a foreign military intelligence unit attempted to probe a defense ministry server.
But it feels far away.
As a citizen, that feels abstract. It feels like a spy movie playing out above your pay grade. But when a national cybercriminal leverages your country's interconnected systems to steal your personal tax records or accesses your family's highly sensitive health data from your local municipal server, the abstraction vanishes.
It becomes a deeply personal violation. And the psychological fallout from that kind of domestic breach is catastrophic for a modernizing state.
How so?
Because when a citizen's data is stolen from public infrastructure by a domestic criminal, it fundamentally erodes the public's trust in the state's baseline competency. Think about the massive push over the last decade. Governments everywhere are aggressively funneling citizens toward digital portals.
We're practically forced to use them.
We are told to use e-government services, adopt digital IDs, file our taxes through online platforms, and access our medical records via apps. The state demands that we digitize our lives for efficiency.
But if the state demands that participation, they implicitly promise a sanctuary for that data.
Exactly. And if they cannot guarantee that sanctuary, the citizen feels betrayed. It creates a massive chilling effect on the entire concept of digital transformation. If you don't trust the digital shield, you actively resist participating in the interconnected society.
You go back to paper.
You demand paper records.
Yeah.
You refuse to use the portals. It is a direct betrayal of the social contract, manifested in a digital format. And the attackers are acutely aware of this psychological leverage. Sometimes the primary goal of a domestic cybercriminal isn't even to sell the data for financial profit.
Really? Then what is it?
Sometimes the goal is simply to sow chaos, embarrass the local government, and intentionally erode the public's faith in civic institutions.
So we've established this terrifying roster of threats. We have state-sponsored intelligence units with infinite budgets, international ransomware cartels, ideologically driven hacktivists, and domestic cybercriminals eager to exploit their own neighbors.
A fun group.
Yeah, these sound like movie villain-level adversaries. But when you look at the source material, their actual entry points into the nation's infrastructure are shockingly mundane. They're not pulling off intricate digital heists against the fortified front door of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Not at all.
They're looking for the unlocked window in the shed out back. Which brings us right back to our original paradox of decentralization. Candau explicitly identifies the absolute weakest links in the Spanish digital ecosystem.
The local town halls and the small municipalities.
Yes, they are explicitly named as the most vulnerable targets across the board. And the reasons he outlines are painfully practical and entirely structural. It comes down to their small size, a total lack of operational synergy with other government departments, and a fundamental inability to afford robust, dedicated cybersecurity teams.
Yeah.
I mean, a town of 4,000 people has a budget for road maintenance and trash collection. They cannot afford to retain a team of elite threat hunters.
The reality of local government IT is stark. They're incredibly lucky if they have one dedicated IT professional on staff.
Right, one guy for the whole town.
And that person is usually responsible for resetting passwords, fixing the jammed printer in the mayor's office, and somehow also defending the municipal server against the Russian GRU. It is an impossible, mathematically absurd scenario.
So how do you fix a structural impossibility? Candau explains that the state has realized they cannot leave these municipalities to fend for themselves. They've stepped in to provide what the CCN calls horizontal cybersecurity services. They've built out a massive national SOC network.
The Security Operations Center.
SOC stands for Security Operations Center, yeah. And the operational statistics Candau shares about this network are frankly staggering. Just in this current year, this national SOC network managed over 200,000 distinct security incidents.
Managing 200,000 incidents in a single year indicates a volume of hostile activity that is difficult to truly conceptualize. That is a relentless 247 barrage against the infrastructure.
But the truly critical part of that statistic is the breakdown of where those incidents originated. Out of those 200,000 incidents, an incredibly impressive 65%, which is roughly 130,000 incidents, were reported directly upward by local SOCs.
Wow.
Candau notes that this massive volume of localized reporting puts Spain at the absolute forefront of incident exchange within the entire European Union.
We need to pause and seriously analyze the structural triumph hidden inside those 130,000 local notifications. If we look back just a few years, Those 130,000 incidents would have represented 130,000 silent, isolated failures.
Walk me through what a silent failure looks like in a small town hall.
Okay, picture this. A municipal server in a small town gets breached by a ransomware script. The solo IT administrator comes in on a Monday morning, sees the ransom note on the screen, and completely panics.
Because it's their fault, or they think it is.
Right. Because they are isolated and fear losing their job, they don't call the federal authorities.
Right.
They quietly wipe the infected server, restore whatever data they can from a dusty backup drive, and tell absolutely no one out of sheer embarrassment.
Wow.
The attacker, meanwhile, realizes their script works perfectly, notes the vulnerability, and immediately moves on to the next small town down the highway to do it again. The broader immune system learns nothing because the infected cell hid the symptoms.
The mole always wins because the person holding the mallet won't admit there's a mole.
Precisely.
Hmm.
But by establishing these horizontal services, the central government changed the incentives. They are essentially deploying a high-level cybersecurity umbrella over every underfunded municipality.
Right.
They provide the centralized monitoring tools, but more importantly, they provide a safe, penalty-free channel for local administrators to report incidents. The fact that 65% of the network's alerts are now flowing up from the local level proves definitively that the architectural model is working.
The immune system is talking.
Yes. The localized immune cells are successfully detecting the pathogens and transmitting distress signals to the central nervous system before the infection spreads. It is a massive testament to the silent, largely anonymous labor of regional tech teams. The media loves to focus on elite, offensive cyber operatives. But the actual backbone of national defense consists of these local IT defenders and regional administrations working grueling hours to protect unglamorous civic systems.
That structural success story is highly encouraging. But the source material does not let us get comfortable. It immediately pivots to provide a terrifying counterexample of what happens when these local lifelines are compromised in critical sectors. Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, incredibly disturbing. The interview specifically zeroes in on the vulnerability of the healthcare system.
Oh man, this part is intense.
It is. And we aren't just talking about hackers locking up the billing department to extort money or stealing patient records to sell on the dark web. They are talking about the operational networks inside hospitals.
The physical hardware that interacts directly with human biology.
Exactly. The landscape of a modern hospital is entirely networked. Electromedicine devices, massive MRI and CT scanners, fully monitored operating rooms buzzing with life support sensors. Every single one of these machines is a node on a network. And the horrific real-world consequence that Candau points out is a paradigm shift in the attacker's intent.
Right.
He notes that attackers aren't just hitting hospital networks to lock them down. There have been instances where attacks are designed to actively, subtly manipulate diagnostic results to deliberately deceive doctors.
The implications of that are chilling. It alters the entire threat model from data theft to kinetic harm.
It fundamentally breaks the foundational trust of modern medicine, going back to the idea of a physical diagnosis. If you break your arm, the doctor looks at an X-ray, sees the jagged white line, and sets the bone. The doctor relies entirely on the objective truth of the machine.
Right, they don't question the image.
Exactly. The idea that a cybercriminal could infiltrate the hospital's operational server and digitally alter an MRI image, perhaps removing a tumor from a scan so the doctor sends a sick patient home, or adding an anomaly so a healthy patient undergoes unnecessary surgery. I mean, it takes the abstract academic concept of network security and makes it visceral.
It makes it a matter of life and death.
It is no longer just about protecting data compliance. It is about protecting the objective physical reality that medical professionals rely on to make life or death decisions.
It's a direct, calculated assault on human life executed through digital means. And it highlights why securing these operational networks in a healthcare environment is arguably the hardest challenge in the industry. The architecture of a hospital network is notoriously chaotic.
Why is it so chaotic compared to, say, a bank?
Well, you often have legacy medical devices. $1 million imaging machines running on outdated operating systems from 10 years ago because the manufacturer no longer updates the software.
Oh, and they can't just throw away $1 million machine.
Exactly. And these highly vulnerable machines are often sitting on the exact same broad network as the guest Wi-Fi being used by anxious families in the waiting room.
Wait, you literally have the coffee shop Wi-Fi right next to the life support monitors.
You do. And from a cultural standpoint, medical professionals will always, rightly so, prioritize immediate patient care over security friction.
That makes sense.
If an emergency room physician is crashing a patient and needs their medical history, they need it in 3 seconds. They will not tolerate authenticating through 3 layers of cryptographic security, entering a token, and waiting for a firewall to clear their request.
The patient would die.
Right. Balancing the absolute necessity for immediate, frictionless access to data with the absolute necessity of data integrity is a tightrope walk. When an attacker subtly manipulates a diagnostic result, they are weaponizing the doctor's inherent trust against the patient. It merges psychological warfare with physical endangerment.
So recognizing the immense structural vulnerabilities of thousands of underfunded town halls and the hyper-complex, terrifying realities of critical hospital networks is step one. The problem is clear, but how do you practically solve it? You cannot just send out a polite memo asking thousands of independent, under-resourced local entities to please prioritize their cybersecurity budget next quarter.
No, the era of polite encouragement ended a long time ago. Asking nicely has been the strategy for the last 2 decades, and the market has proven it does not work.
Which opens the door to the regulatory tsunami that is currently sweeping across the continent.
The tsunami is a good word for it.
The European Union has looked at this fragile, interconnected grid and essentially decided that voluntary best practices are a failure. They are now forcing compliance through strict, sweeping, punitive legislation. The crown jewel of this legal framework is something called the NIS2 directive.
The Network and Information Security Directive, version 2, it is a massive piece of legislation.
And the core pillars of NIS2 are brutally straightforward. The EU is telling entities, you must actively apply state-of-the-art security measures, you must rigorously verify that those measures are actually working, and you must legally demonstrate your compliance to the authorities or face severe financial penalties.
Right.
Now, for Spain specifically, Candau provides a really interesting operational detail. He mentions they are not starting from scratch to meet these EU demands. Spain is leveraging an existing framework called the ENS, the Esquema Nacional de Seguridad, or National Security Framework.
Yes, the ENS.
The massive relief for Spanish organizations is that Candau estimates if an entity is already fully compliant with the ENS, they will automatically satisfy about 95% of the new NIS2 requirements.
That 95% overlap is the payoff for years of invisible bureaucratic labor. It means the Spanish public and private sectors are incredibly well-positioned compared to other member states. The groundwork laid by the National Cryptologic Center, slowly pushing the ENS standards over the years, has acted as a shock absorber for this massive European mandate.
But there's still that 5% gap.
Yes.
And Candau admits the nuance in that remaining 5% is incredibly tricky. He mentions there will be a necessary 2-year refinement period to figure out how to interpret some of the more complex demands of NIS2. For instance, the directive demands securing the entire supply chain and guaranteeing full operational continuity even during a massive disaster.
Which is incredibly hard for a small company.
Right. Candau openly suggests that regulators might need to face reality and adjust some of these requirements from high security down to medium or basic levels, simply to make them technically achievable for smaller organizations. And as if the burden of NIS2 isn't heavy enough, the source material introduces another upcoming regulation, the CRA, or Cyber Resilience Act. And the scope of the CRA is wild. It will mandate baseline cybersecurity standards for every single internet-connected product sold within the European market.
Every single node on the network, right down to consumer electronics.
We're talking about everything from an industrial turbine in a power plant to the smart light bulb you just screwed into your kitchen fixture. But let me stop and push back on behalf of the listener here, because this is where the alphabet soup gets exhausting. Hearing about NIS2, ENS, CRA is a European Union just drowning companies in bureaucratic paperwork instead of fostering actual technical security.
It's a valid question.
Are we confusing a checklist of compliance with actual dynamic safety? Because I can guarantee you that filling out a 200-page audit report doesn't stop a Russian zero-day exploit from breaching a server. It just proves you knew how to use a PDF editor.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cynicism you are expressing is the exact center of the fiercest debate happening in the cybersecurity industry today.
Yeah.
Are we building a more secure world, or have we simply created a highly lucrative compliance industry where consultants get rich checking boxes? But to understand the EU's aggressive posture, you have to look at the historical market failure. For years, government agencies published excellent, technically sound guidelines and best practices, and the vast majority of companies completely ignored them.
Because there were no teeth.
Right. Why? Because robust security is incredibly expensive, it causes friction for the user, and critically, it does not generate revenue. The market, left to its own devices, will always prioritize speed to market and low production costs over invisible security features.
The manufacturer knows the smart fridge will sell based on its touchscreen, not on whether its internal Wi-Fi chip uses encrypted protocols, so it goes to market vulnerable.
Precisely. The shift to aggressive legal mandates like NIS2 and the CRA is a desperate attempt by regulators to correct a massive market failure. By forcing compliance and threatening devastating fines, you force the corporate board of directors to care. Security stops being an IT budget annoyance and becomes a legal liability issue.
So the fines are the point.
Yes. However, the EU isn't entirely blind to the bureaucratic nightmare they are creating. In the interview, Candau points to something highly revealing: the upcoming digital omnibus.
I noticed that term. What exactly is the digital omnibus attempting to fix?
It is essentially the European Union's tacit admission that they may have severely over-legislated. They threw so much complex regulation at the wall so quickly that they risk paralyzing the very organizations they are trying to protect with administrative overhead. The biggest pain point is incident reporting.
How so?
Under the current fragmented rules, if a hospital gets hacked, the IT team might have to spend the first critical 48 hours filling out distinct legal notification forms for 5 different regulatory bodies, rather than spending that time actively fighting the malware spreading through their network.
Oh, that's absurd. The paperwork actively gets in the way of deploying the fire hose.
Exactly. The regulation becomes an impediment to the defense. So the digital omnibus is an effort to step back, simplify, and streamline these contradictory processes. Candau notes that the ultimate operational goal in Spain, driven by the transposition of NIS2 into national law, is to create a unified national cybersecurity center.
A one-stop shop.
Right. The vision is to harmonize all this fragmented governance. A company should have one clear authority, one unified set of rules, and a single streamlined portal to report and respond to threats. It is an attempt to find a survivable balance between mandating baseline security and allowing organizations the operational agility to actually fight back.
Okay, so we can view regulation as the legal mechanism that forces human behavior to change. It legally mandates that the hospital must buy the fire hose and install the alarms. But human behavior, and specifically human reaction times, are no longer anywhere near fast enough to stop a modern cyber attack.
Not even close.
The attackers aren't manually typing commands or filling out paperwork. They are deploying automated scripts that compromise a network in milliseconds, which means the defense must take a massive leap into automation to survive. This introduces the most explosive, paradigm-shifting variable in the entire conversation: artificial intelligence.
The AI arms race is not a future theoretical concept. It is fundamentally altering the physics of the battlefield right now.
Candau is very upfront about the offensive reality. He acknowledges that attackers are aggressively integrating AI to improve and accelerate their strikes. They're using AI to automate massive vulnerability scanning across millions of IP addresses.
Yeah.
They are using generative language models to write perfectly localized, grammatically flawless, highly convincing phishing emails that bypass traditional spam filters. They are creating polymorphic malware, code that uses AI to constantly rewrite its own signature so traditional antivirus software can't recognize it.
It's terrifying stuff.
It is. But amidst all that doom and gloom, Candau makes a really fascinating counterintuitive point. He argues that in the long run, the defenders actually possess a critical structural advantage in the AI arms race.
And that advantage comes down to the fundamental fuel of artificial intelligence data. Defenders possess exponentially more hysterical and behavioral data.
Let's explore why that is.
Yeah.
Because the attacker only knows what they can probe from the outside, or the narrow slice of the network they manage to see once they breach a single node.
Right.
But the defenders, especially a centralized entity like the National SOC Network managing 200,000 incidents, they see the entire ocean. They see all the mundane baseline traffic. They see the subtle anomalies. They see the failed login attempts across hundreds of thousands of connected devices. And Candau lays out a highly specific operational goal for the next 3 years. He states that defenders must use AI to automate their complex security configurations and allow the machine to handle the vast majority of incoming threats.
The specific target ratio he discusses is what makes this strategy viable. It is the math that saves the system.
The 90-10 split. He says the explicit goal is to deploy AI to eliminate 90% of the manual repetitive workload currently crushing IT teams. all the routine alerts, the basic patching schedules, the blocking of known threat signatures. The AI handles it instantly without human intervention.
Right.
This massive offloading allows the human administrators to focus 100% of their cognitive energy on the remaining 10% of novel, unprecedented attacks. The 0 days, the things the AI cannot predict because there is no historical data for them.
Exactly.
But I have to stop and play devil's advocate here. Giving an artificial intelligence autonomous control over the defense networks of an entire nation, well, I mean, allowing a black box algorithm to automatically reconfigure firewalls or isolate critical servers the moment it detects an anomaly without a human verifying the decision, isn't that essentially putting our national infrastructure on autopilot?
I hear you.
What happens if the AI misinterprets a massive critical software update being pushed to a hospital's MRI machines as a coordinated malware attack, and the AI autonomously shuts down the entire hospital network to protect it? We created a self-inflicted denial of service.
The fear of autonomous systems making catastrophic errors is highly valid. It's the classic autopilot dilemma. But you have to weigh that risk against the reality of the current alternative. Right now, the human analysts are drowning. They're actively failing because the volume of data exceeds human biological capacity.
So they literally can't keep up.
No, it's physically impossible. Candau uses a very specific, deeply evocative phrase in the interview when discussing the goal of AI integration. He says the objective is to create expertos descansados, rested experts.
Rested experts. I genuinely love that phrase. It highlights something that is almost never discussed in high-level technology briefings, the physical and mental fatigue of the human operator.
Burnout is arguably the single most severe vulnerability in the global cybersecurity industry today. It is a silent epidemic. I want you to imagine the reality of a Tier 1 SOC analyst. You are sitting in a windowless room for a 12-hour shift, staring at a complex dashboard that flashes red with a critical alert 10,000 times a day.
Oh my God.
And 9,999 of those alerts are false positives. It's a misconfigured router, or a user typing their password wrong 3 times, or just the low-level background radiation of the internet.
That inevitably leads to alarm fatigue.
Extreme paralyzing alarm fatigue. It is a known psychological phenomenon. By the time the one truly catastrophic, novel anomaly finally appears on the screen, the highly sophisticated, stealthy nation-state attack that is slowly, quietly exfiltrating sensitive citizen data, the human analyst is exhausted.
They just click it away.
Their eyes glazed over. They've clicked dismiss on the last 1,000 alerts, and they click dismiss on the real threat, purely out of muscle memory and cognitive exhaustion. They miss the crucial signal because they are buried under a mountain of noise.
So in this context, the AI isn't the commander, it's the filter.
Exactly. AI is not being framed by the CCN as a replacement for human intellect, intuition, or ethical judgment. It is being deployed as an essential anti-fatigue mechanism. The AI acts as the ultimate tireless filter, dealing with the 90% of the noise with machine speed and unyielding precision. It sweeps the floor.
I love that. It sweeps the floor.
So when that human expert finally sits down at their terminal to review an escalated alert, they are rested. They are sharp. They are not suffering from decision fatigue. They are only looking at the 10% of highly complex data that actually requires human lateral thinking and contextual judgment. You do not want your most brilliant security architects wasting their cognitive capacity triaging basic spam filters. You want them analyzing the architectural blueprint. The AI allows the human to remain human.
That perspective completely shifts the AI narrative. It moves it from being this terrifying autonomous decision maker that might accidentally shut down a city to being the ultimate necessary assistant for the human defender. But here is the reality check. Building this incredible AI infrastructure, aligning thousands of disparate municipalities with dense EU regulations, and protecting fragmented hospital networks from diagnostic manipulation. You cannot accomplish that level of systemic overhaul by just sending out a PDF and hoping for the best.
Definitely not.
It requires massive, face-to-face, high-trust collaboration across sectors that traditionally do not talk to each other.
You have to physically bring the entire ecosystem into the same room. You have to force the cross-pollination of ideas.
Which brings us full circle to the sheer, record-breaking scale of the event that sparked this entire conversation. The 19th ESTIC Days is not just a corporate trade show. It is the physical, geographical manifestation of this digital shield we've been talking about. And the scope detailed in the source material is wild. It's not just the National Cryptologic Center operating in a vacuum anymore. The event is deeply, officially integrated with the 7th Cyber Defense Days of the Junk Cyberspace Command.
So you have the Heavy operational military aspect fully integrated into the civilian framework.
Yes, but it goes even further. They also fully integrate the rooted Congress into the event. And from what I understand, that adds a completely different, almost contradictory demographic to the mix.
The rooted Congress adds an absolutely vital dimension. It brings in the bleeding edge, grassroots hacking community, the independent researchers, the academics, the people who actually take the systems apart for fun.
It is a wild mix of cultures. The sources mention specific, highly advanced technical workshops happening at the Rooted Congress alongside the policy briefings. They are running deep dives into tools like Radar 2 for complex software reverse engineering, and hands-on sessions dedicated purely to the kind of security automation and AI scripting we were just discussing. So picture the hallways of this venue. You have stiff military generals, you have EU government bureaucrats obsessed with NIS2 compliance, and you have hardcore hoodie-wearing reverse engineers all drinking coffee in the same building.
That cultural collision is by design, and it is essential for survival. The bureaucrats need to understand the military threat. And crucially, the military and the regulators desperately need the grassroots hackers to show them what is actually possible on the ground, bypassing the theoretical models.
And the sheer numbers prove how desperately the industry craves this collaboration. The event boasts 300 expert speakers. They are running 220 separate conferences and workshops. They have a record-breaking 112 corporate sponsors. The demand to attend was so overwhelmingly high that Candau notes registration for the primary days, November 25th and 26th, literally had to be halted.
They sold out.
The massive venue reached absolute physical full capacity. They could not safely fit another human being inside the building. And amidst all this chaotic energy, they are holding the secretive Atenia Awards to recognize and elevate top national and international cyber talent.
When you look at those numbers, the historical context of how the CCN got to this point is what I find most compelling. Candau reflects briefly on the origins of this massive apparatus. The National Cryptologic Center started as a tiny, obscure InfoSec unit back in the 1990s. The Operational Incident Response Arm, the CCN CERT, wasn't even born until 2005.
In the timeline of human history, that is a blink of an eye. Even in technology years, 2 decades is an incredibly short runway to build a national defense apparatus.
It is a phenomenal acceleration, and the exponential growth of the ESSEC Days event over those last 15 to 20 years is not an accident of marketing. It is a direct, undeniable mirror of society's rapid total shift to remote services and digital transformation. As every aspect of our lives moved online, the surface area for attack grew exponentially, and the required defense apparatus had to violently scale up to match it.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the 300 speakers, the sold-out venues, and the mandated integration of military, civilian, and hacker communities, it tells me that the digital shield Candau is championing isn't actually made of firewalls or AI scripts or EU regulations.
No, it's not.
It's made of people. It is the actual human network, the handshakes in the hallways between a hospital IT director and a military threat analyst, the shared workshops on reverse engineering, the secretive awards that keep young talent motivated, that is the true architecture required to make the digital network secure.
This raises an important question, though. Perhaps the most critical question for the next decade. With the technological landscape shifting this fast and the stakes escalating to the point of manipulated medical diagnostics, how do we continually discover and foster the massive volume of human talent necessary to maintain this shield? We spent a lot of time praising the anonymous local IT defenders protecting small town halls. We talked about the necessity of having rested experts to manage the AI systems. But the harsh reality is that technology is advancing infinitely faster than the human capital pipeline.
You can have the best AI in the world filtering 90% of the noise, but if you don't have enough brilliant humans to analyze the remaining 10%, the system still fails.
Exactly. The rested experts are useless if we don't have a deep enough bench of them to begin with. The ultimate secret to the digital shield holding firm isn't just about deploying better algorithms or passing stricter EU laws. It requires a fundamental shift in our educational and cultural pipeline. We have to start treating cybersecurity not as a niche IT hobby, but as the foundational, essential civic trade of the 21st century. It needs to be viewed with the same structural importance as civil engineering or medicine.
Because it is the invisible scaffolding of modern life. We've covered an immense amount of complex terrain today. We started by breaking down the structural philosophy of a digital shield, exploring why a highly decentralized country must actively mimic an interconnected biological immune system to survive.
Hmm.
We stepped inside room 25 and confronted the terrifying reality of modern threats, from declassified state actor TTPs to the deeply visceral horror of domestic cybercriminals manipulating hospital diagnostic machines.
We waded through the heavy regulatory tsunami of NIS2, the ANS, and the CRA, analyzing the painful but necessary transition from asking nicely with voluntary guidelines to enforcing security to strict legal mandates.
And we explored the nuances of the AI arms race, moving past the fear of autonomous machines to understand AI as a desperately needed cognitive filter, a tool to combat alarm fatigue and leave our human defenders rested for the unprecedented threats. All of this culminating in the physical manifestation of this ecosystem at the massive, record-breaking gathering of the ESTIC Days.
It's been quite a journey.
When you step back and view the entire board, you realize that your most mundane daily digital interactions, swiping your transit card, checking a blood test result online, even just turning on your smart lights, they all rely entirely on this invisible, hyper-vigilant ecosystem of people and algorithms working flawlessly 247.
It is genuinely humbling when you recognize the sheer scale of the orchestrated effort required to ensure that, on most days, absolutely nothing happens.
The ultimate success is silence. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your connected day, something that builds on the trajectory of everything we've unpacked. We talked extensively about the upcoming Cyber Resilience Act, which will legally force a baseline of security onto every single connected device manufactured, right down to the microchip in your fridge.
Yeah.
And we discussed the goal of AI autonomously handling 90% of the active defense workload across the network.
Right.
As these two massive forces converge, ubiquitous hardware regulation and autonomous software defense, are we rapidly moving toward a future where cybersecurity becomes entirely invisible to the average citizen? Will it be built so deeply into the fabric of our devices that it functions exactly like the plumbing in a house, something you never have to think about, understand, or interact with until a pipe catastrophically bursts?
That's the dream of the regulators.
Yeah. Or will the escalating sophistication of the AI arms race and the constant morphing evolution of these threats eventually demand the exact opposite? Will the sheer volume of attacks eventually require citizens to stop being passive, oblivious consumers of technology and legally mandate that you become an active, educated participant in maintaining the national digital shield?
It is a profound dilemma, because if we reach a point where the X-ray machine can be manipulated to lie to the doctor, you can no longer afford the luxury of blind trust. You have to understand the mechanics of the machine you are trusting your life to.
A completely new definition of digital literacy. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible front lines of our hyper-connected world. We love taking these complex hidden systems and unpacking them with you.
It has been a fantastic exploration. Keep questioning the invisible systems you rely on every day.
Stay curious, stay secure, and we will catch you on the next one.